How the people are doing? So, it is time for us to compare the OnePlus 10 Pro, indeed a 2020 flagship, to the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra. Now, yes, I understand the Mi 12 is here, and that's great and all, but it's not launched in India yet, so I can't really do anything about that. But instead, I can compare it to what is arguably one of the best flagships that Xiaomi has ever made. And despite the fact that it is from last year, I think the Mi 11 Ultra stands a fair chance when comparing against the OnePlus 10 Pro. So we are starting off with what I had considered would be a pretty simple image, but there are a few major differences. I mean, it's pretty clear that the Mi 11 is not nailing that white balance. It's pretty far off, on the cool side that is. OnePlus is doing a fairly good job, and it is giving us slightly more shadow detail. So yeah, I think OnePlus is immediately taking a lead. It's not anything major, but it is definitely a lead. Now here's a shot of yours truly, and yes, Mi 11 Ultra is doing a very good job with the highlights. I mean, that's pretty clear. Yes, that was the whole premise of the shot as well. But I have to admit that the OnePlus is doing a much better job at making things look natural. As in, it doesn't look too processed like the Mi 11 Ultra. And it also has really good contrast. So in a way, I do like the OnePlus 10 Pro. It might just be a personal preference. Now here's another shot with the main camera again, and well, the Mi 11 is leaning towards the cool tones. You can see it on the road, and OnePlus is the one that looks natural. Now it's not as bad as the very first shot that we saw, but yeah, the OnePlus still takes a win for just having more natural colors. And I am kind of liking the extra bit of contrast on the OnePlus as well. It really brings out the texture on the road. Now this shot, well, yeah, the Mi 11 has a white balance problem, so that's... And you know, I don't remember the Mi 11 Ultra having such a major problem with white balance before. I mean, yeah, sure, it wasn't, particularly exquisite, but not as bad as this. One thing that surprises me here as well is that both are really underexposing the shadows for some reason. So naturally, I took a shot with the sun in the background. I mean, what else could I have done, right? So yeah, both phones, now they are performing extremely well. I like the white balance on the Mi 11. It is very close to natural. It has high contrast on the OnePlus 10 Pro, but yeah, the point is both are very close in this situation, I think in the previous image, this HDR processing just didn't kick in for either of the phones. Up next, an ultra-wide shot. I mean, this is probably the most interesting camera on both phones because they are supposed to be very high quality, right? And it is on the Mi 11 Ultra, but on the OnePlus 10 Pro, OnePlus decided to make some changes to the sensor and, increase the field of view and everything, and that's fun. I like large field of view cameras, but there are drawbacks, and we're gonna look at them. So first and foremost are the details. Indeed, I think the Mi 11 Ultra, despite the fact that it just completely abhors sharpening whatsoever, it still manages to pull off better details than the OnePlus 10 Pro, which does add sharpening, but it's just not as good. And that's simply because normal ultra-wide shots on the OnePlus, they're cropping in on a 150-degree field of view ultra-wide camera, and so that's why you just don't get as good details as the Mi 11. Now speaking of details, I mean, we have to check out the high resolution modes on both. So 48 megapixels with the main camera on the OnePlus, 50 on the Mi 11 Ultra, and I mean the shots look pretty good. The Mi 11 does have higher contrast, you could go either way on that, but the details, that's an entirely different story because now the Mi 11 is doing a far better job. Now I know I said the ultra-wide camera had an inherent hardware drawback on details, but I'm not sure why the main camera is not doing a very good job here, because there's just so much more processing going on the OnePlus 10 Pro. I mean, you can see all the haloing around the leaves, that huge tower in the back, and it doesn't look very nice now, does it? The Mi 11 looks far cleaner comparatively. Now on the ultra wide, well, I mean, we can't really expect much now, even though it's high resolution. I can tell you right now, even without zooming in, that the details are not as good on the OnePlus 10 Pro. And also the colors on the Mi 11, just incredible. I'm really liking the white balance. This was a little bit before sunset. Now zooming in, of course, this is exactly what I had expected, because the OnePlus, cropping in so much, even with the high resolution modes, it just cannot resolve enough detail. And that is a pretty major problem. Now, how much it's going to affect you, that depends entirely on you guys. I really do not like that OnePlus had to sacrifice so much detail, but that's actually not the worst of it. There is something more, and we'll get to it in a moment, but first, let's take a look at high-res 5x zoom on the Mi 11 Ultra. You can take 48 megapixel shots with it, and I mean obviously it's gonna do a much better job than the OnePlus 10 Pro, because OnePlus has only a 3x zoom, so this is a digital crop. So yeah, Mi 11 Ultra takes an easy win here. Now this right here, the lack of a good macro mode on the OnePlus 10 Pro is the biggest offender in my opinion. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense why OnePlus would deliberately remove such an incredible feature just to give us 150-degree field of view. I mean, yeah, it's cool and all, but OnePlus 9 Pro from last year, it had one of the best macro modes, and it baffles me that OnePlus would just remove such an incredible feature. Now this right here, this is a 150-degree field of view on the OnePlus 10 Pro. Does it really look that much wider than the Mi 11 Ultra? Now don't get me wrong, Mi 11 Ultra has a very wide field of view on its ultra wide. That's one of the selling points. But I mean, it's not 150 degrees, and that's why you don't see any of the distortion, but the overall field of view is not very different compared to the OnePlus 10 Pro, now is it? So yeah, I don't think any of the sacrifices were worth just this extra bit of field of view. I mean, they could have done what Mi 11 Ultra is doing. Now for zoom, so this right here is 3x on the OnePlus 10 Pro compared to 3x digital on the Mi 11, and yes, the OnePlus is processing the image quite a bit. I mean, you can see that it has a lot more shadow detail, but there is a little bit of haloing going on around the edges of the subject, so there is that. The Mi 11 is taking the more natural route, and yes, despite the fact that the 3x zoom on the OnePlus 10 Pro is not exactly very high quality, it is still doing a better job at preserving detail. But 5x and honestly anything beyond that, it's just going to be the Mi 11 Ultra's game right there, because obviously it's optical zoom and the sensor on the Mi 11 Ultra, incredibly high quality right there. I mean, at 10x zoom, you know, the case is pretty obvious. You can see a bunch of artifacting and processing going on the OnePlus, and yes, more shadow detail as well, but the Mi 11 is just doing such a better job at giving us a natural looking image. Now then, human subjects, this is going to be kind of interesting because both are fairly decent at this, in my opinion. They're not the best, they're not incredibly consistent or anything like that, but they can be pretty good. Like in this case, you know, the lighting is good and both have incredible selfies right here. I don't really have any complaints. I like the high contrast and slightly higher saturation on the Mi 11 Ultra, but that's a personal preference, and you know, if you don't like that, the OnePlus is the way to go. Now here's another, and this time the OnePlus is blowing out some highlights on my face. And the Mi 11 again with a slightly higher contrast, slightly richer blacks, which I do prefer quite a bit, and the mildly higher saturation. I mean, it's such a small difference that I didn't even notice the first time I saw these images. So yeah, it's very close, at least up until now, because in this shot I think it's pretty obvious Mi 11 Ultra is pulling ahead with the highlight preservation. So this is what I meant with slight inconsistencies. A lot of shots on the OnePlus tend to come out with highlights overexposed. I'm not sure why that happens. I mean, it shows that it's doing HDR processing and all that jazz, but it is inconsistent in that regard. But I mean, it's obviously not terrible. You can see it is doing a very good job in this case, handling the highlights, the shadows. I mean, it looks just as good as a Mi 11 Ultra, minus the extra bit of saturation on the Mi 11. Now, slightly more challenging situation with a bunch of highlights to control, and both are kind of messing it up. You know, both look kind of faded in this case as well. I would have really liked more contrast in this case. That was kind of what I was going for, but you know, they kind of overexposed everything and it doesn't really look very nice on either phone. So it is a tie, but you know, not for a particularly good reason. Now, backlit selfie portrait. We had to have one of those, right? I mean, it wouldn't be one of my camera comparisons if you didn't. Now, yes, Mi 11 Ultra is completely blowing it out in the background, and that's obviously not looking very good. The OnePlus, it is handling the highlights better, but it is messing up with a little bit of the edge detection. And I mean, both phones just make the entire image look so faded again. You know, portrait selfies, I wish they had more contrast, and you know, they need to be a little bit more crunchy than this, otherwise it's just not gonna look very good. But anyways, there is another new feature on the OnePlus 10 Pro, thankfully, because we have had enough of those removed at this point. But yeah, we have night mode selfies. We get better detail. You can see it on my shirt, you can see parts of it on my face. And yes, I was melting that day. Like, man, the heat was so crazy. I was basically getting barbecued out there. But hey, camera comparisons come first, right? The one issue on the OnePlus, at least in this case, is that it really cannot handle motion blur. You can see that even though I wasn't even breathing when I took this photograph, there is still some blurriness happening. But in case of selfies, the Mi 11 does pull one over the OnePlus 10 Pro, because you can take some really nice looking rear camera selfies on the Mi 11 Ultra thanks to the display on the back. I mean, you can use the OnePlus in a similar fashion, but you'll be going completely blind, while I guess partially blind on the Mi 11 Ultra because the display is so small. And most importantly, you can use the ultra-wide camera, which is, as we have established at this point, fantastic in quality. Now then, rear camera portraits. Yeah, I think the OnePlus is taking a lead immediately, because despite the fact that there is maybe a little bit more yellow in my skin than I'd like on the OnePlus, it's still far better than all of that red and magenta that we're getting on the Mi 11 Ultra. I think it's just a bit too saturated in my opinion. This was backlit, so yes, it's a difficult situation for any phone to fathom, and we are using the 2x digital crop on both phones. Yes, it is digital on the OnePlus as well, despite the fact that it still has its 3x telephoto camera, and it's been over a year and we still cannot use it for portraits. But yeah, in this case at least, I'm not exactly sure which one to pick because neither look very good. Mi 11 is faded, the OnePlus completely crushed. But the OnePlus was very inconsistent, at least for this shot, because maybe it was because of the backlight situation, but one of these shots came out looking super dark. I was basically a silhouette like here, and there were many that were completely overexposed. So yeah, inconsistency is still a problem on the OnePlus, and maybe that's gonna get fixed with some updates. Hopefully. Now here's another shot, and I'm really liking the way the OnePlus is handling the glare from the window here. I mean, it is blowing it out like the Mi 11 Ultra to maybe a slightly lesser extent, but it is not letting it affect the shadows like the Mi 11 is. Which is why the OnePlus has so much better contrast and the skin tones look really nice. So yeah, I think now the OnePlus takes a really nice win. Here's another shot, and yeah, this is a tie because I mean, it's almost perfect on both phones. You know, they are handling the highlights plenty well, and the shadows are well exposed enough without making things look flat. Contrast is good. I would say the Mi 11 is maybe processing the highlights a bit too much. You know, it looks a bit weird, but yeah, it's such a small complaint that I don't think it even matters. Now then, night mode. Now this was not a very difficult shot, which is why both phones are performing exceptionally well here. I mean, you could say the Mi 11 has more general detail compared to the OnePlus 10 Pro. A lot of the detail in the bricks and in the bushes in the background, it's just brought out a little bit more, but otherwise it's plenty good on both. This shot right here, this was not easy because there's a lot going on. If I had to pick one, it would be the OnePlus in this case. I like the Mi 11, I like that it is giving us a lot of shadow detail, but the skin just looks a bit too desaturated for my liking. So this is just my personal opinion here. You know, you could go either way because both look very close in this situation. Now this one, yeah, it's a crazy shot. You can see 3 lights in basically the background, and I think once again, if I had to pick one, it would be the OnePlus 10 Pro. Not only do I like the extra bit of contrast that the OnePlus has, the really dark night sky that we're getting on the OnePlus, it looks far better than the Mi 11 because of one simple reason. The darkness in the sky makes it look like nighttime, and it adds so much contrast to the shot. Now here's an ultra-wide shot with yours truly in there, and well, I must say, I had actually thought that, you know, either of these phones might end up blowing things out in the background. But they didn't. You know, this is an exceptional shot on both. You know, the contrast is well maintained. It's a touch higher on the OnePlus 10 Pro. Not that I hate it, I mean, it looks really nice. So yeah, I think it's a tie here. Now here's another ultra wide. This is you know, arguably simpler than the shot we took previously, but yeah, for the most part, I just wanted to see how well night skies are rendered on either of these phones, and I think I like the Mi 11 a little bit more. This right here is a personal opinion, of course, because I just like slightly bluish night skies compared to just dark gray ones that we get on the OnePlus 10 Pro. I mean, it looks nice and all, but I just like how the Mi 11 looks, and I also really like the extra bit of saturation we're getting on the Mi 11. Now here is an ultra low light shot. I can tell you right now, I could not see anything that you see a little bit beyond the fence, except for those lights very far off in the background. It was pitch black to my eyes, so the fact that both phones are exposing it, it's really nice, but Yeah, the Mi 11 it's doing a far better job. You're getting proper saturation in the greens, you're getting a lot more detail compared to the OnePlus 10 Pro. Yes, the sky is a bit blue, which obviously plays to my favor. I really like blue skies, as I said before. But if you don't, then maybe that's the one good thing about the OnePlus 10 Pro here. Here's an ultra wide shot, also pretty much in ultra low light, but we're also adding a light in the foreground, which needs to be controlled, and I guess it's being controlled plenty well enough. It's not bad or anything. I'm gonna pick the Mi 11 here, strictly because I like the extra bit of saturation once again. The OnePlus really tends to desaturate in some of these shots, and well, I'm just not a fan of that. Now the zoom in night mode, I would recommend not really using it because you're not gonna get ideal results, but if you had to, you can use 3x on the OnePlus 10 Pro. It's not gonna come out looking very good. I mean, you can see we have a huge magenta tint on the OnePlus 10 Pro, but it does preserve a little bit more detail thanks to optical zoom. It's not anything monumental, but it is a touch better. At 5x, interestingly enough, the Mi 11 Ultra just completely underexposed. Well, I shouldn't say underexposed because, you know, this is exactly how it looked to my eyes, so I guess it was maintaining the realistic exposure. Now, OnePlus is maintaining the brightness that we saw before, but yeah, for the most part, I would say the Mi 11 is going to perform better with 5x. I mean, obviously, but it is preserving a lot of detail here, and you know, if you took a scene at night with a little bit more light, you could get far better results. Now finally, we have the moon. I mean, we obviously had to have the moon, right? It's one of the things the Mi 11 Ultra can do that the OnePlus 10 Pro cannot. Now, the Mi 11 is not the best. Obviously, you can see it gives a very faded shot. I'm absolutely not a fan of that, and it's the same story for the 60x zoom as well. The previous one was 30x, of course, and it's easy to fix in post. All you gotta do is just pump up the contrast and maybe, you know, sharpen the image a little bit if you want. And basically, it took me like 5 seconds to do this, so I don't think it's gonna be a major deal. I mean, you're obviously not gonna go around taking moonshots every single day, are you? Editing a single photo, it's not gonna be a big deal, at least in my opinion. So that is the end of this photography comparison. Now if you want the videos, it's gonna come out very soon. I've already taken up all the samples, so keep a lookout for that. But as for the performance of these phones, I would say that, yeah, the Mi 11 Ultra on one hand, it is a really nice flagship camera that you just cannot go wrong with. It has some downsides here and there, obviously, which camera doesn't, but you know, it stacks up against the OnePlus 10 Pro, and in a lot of situations it even beat the OnePlus 10 Pro's new camera. Now of course, I've mentioned it time and again, but I am very disappointed with the fact that OnePlus decided to do what they did with the ultra-wide camera. Now, if you don't mind it, of course, the OnePlus 10 Pro is still a very good camera. It still has a lot of amazing features. It could have been much better. That's my biggest complaint here. But anyways, I'll be seeing you guys soon with another one. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and of course, subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be seeing you soon. Cheers.